Dear friends, welcome to the second course in the Journalism and Mass Communication program. We are discussing the socio-economic and political scenario and the media perspective. In our previous discussion on this topic, we saw that many aspects of the current scenario had their roots in history and the past. Unless one understood them, it was not possible to have a clarity of thought for better writing. The issues to recall are as follows: political issues, religious and caste based violence, terrorism, Naxalism or Maoist insurgency and political crisis, social issues, territorial movements and disputes, linguistic and educational disputes, corruption and indiscipline, and population and health, economic issues, poverty and economic divide, agricultural and industrial production, liberalization and economic reforms, and impact of market forces and market influence. Among the political issues, we already have had a look at religious and caste violence as also terrorism in our previous discussion. In this discussion today, we will talk about the ultra-left Maoist insurgency and political crisis as the key aspects of the present day scenario, and then later we will move on to the social issues. So, first we take up the issue of Naxalism or Maoist insurgency. The communist or the left movement in India has had a checkered history. It drew and continues to draw inspiration from the politically successful communist movements in the former Soviet Union and China. While it could not catch the fancy of the average Indian voter, it did manage to excite sections of people in a few Indian states, notably West Bengal, Kerala and Tripura, where the left parties combined, came to power and formed the government. In fact, in West Bengal, the left front has been in power for more than 3 decades. On the other hand, the ultra left seems to have spread its influence to many more states than these 3. The radical left, drawing inspiration from the philosophy of armed revolution being the only agent for change, marked its advent in the small village named Naxalbari in West Bengal in the early 60s. In this nondescript place near Siliguri in North Bengal, some peasants raised a banner of revolt against the Indian establishment and vowed to launch an armed revolution in the country. While the movement was contained after a long and violent struggle between the rebels and the state forces, causing many deaths on both sides, the movement actually never died out. It went underground and kept resurfacing from time to time in many states. The demand of the Naxal rebels was categorical. They expressed their lack of faith in the Indian constitution, the Indian system of election, the democratic setup in India, and they wanted an armed struggle to overthrow what they called the oppressive regime of the government of India. They also wanted total control over natural and other resources, often resorting to looting government offices, police stations, and so on. A section of the poor, often landless, farmers, tribals, students, and others, including women, joined the rebels' ranks, and now the Naxals, swearing by the ideology of the late Chinese leader Mao Zedong, the famous lines that power flows from the barrel of the gun, have almost openly declared a war against the Indian state. Their presence now extends to 10 states, and they very frequently keep attacking the central paramilitary forces, police, government offices, and disrupt normal life, business activity, and running of trains in support of their demands.
PI Maoist Politburo member Kishanji alias Koteshwar Rao has spoken exclusively to Times Now, saying the Maoists have launched their biggest ever Operation Venus in retaliation to the West Bengal government's offensive against them. Let's listen in.
And unprecedented operation in the name of Operation Venus, and in West Bengal, central government and the state government combinedly advancing their operations since last 4 months, and now they are going to further deploy another 21 companies of paramilitary forces and 4 companies of Cobras. In this juncture, it is utmost the duty of the revolutionaries to arm the people. To arm the people, we attacked Sakhail police station and we seized all the weapons. And to succeed this attack, we killed one police officer and some other police officers are with us. We are putting a condition before state government and central government that the advancement of the troops towards a crime should be stopped. Otherwise, the captured officials will be annihilated. This is the principle of the guerrilla war. According to us, we captured the police officials and they are with us. If the government accepts the condition, then we will release tomorrow morning the police official with letter. To continue the surprise element, the first forces which will come forward will be attacked and killed. More and more in the leadership of under the leadership of the Maoists, and Maoist movement is extending further newer areas. So you see, for another example, in Chhattisgarh, particularly Dantewada, Bijapur, Jagadalpur and other areas, we are advancing day and night, and since last 7 years, we are battling with the central forces.
In recent years, the Maoists have become more brazen, killing villagers and policemen in large numbers. Currently, it is estimated that they are active in about 223 districts across 20 states in some volume or the other, or roughly 30% of the entire country. The Maoists are also linked to leftist groups in neighboring countries through the organization called Coordination Committee of Maoist Parties and Organizations of South Asia. They are even reported to be getting support from leftist groups outside the region, such as the Communist Party of the Philippines and the Maoist outfits in Nepal. In addition to having claimed nearly 2,200 lives between the year 2005 and 2009, the Maoists are destroying valuable infrastructure, including railways, schools, hospitals, police and government institutions. Moreover, the Maoists have come to run parallel or substitute government structures in their strongholds, making a mockery of India's core political and judicial institutions. They have placed natural resources and economic investments in these areas at a very serious risk. The hardest hit states include Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar and Maharashtra. There are several reports that suggest that the Maoist movement aims at establishing a red corridor from the Pashupatinath temple area in Nepal to Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. We can see that this would extend from India's north to India's south. Officers engaged in anti-Maoist operations are of the view that Maoists in India get moral as well as logistic support from their counterparts in Nepal. The affected regions are largely very backward, inhabited by the poorest of the poor, tribals and generally the oppressed people of the region. Here, the benefit of the government's welfare schemes and facilities has either not reached them or has been pocketed or siphoned off by a cartel of the rich and influential businessmen, corrupt government employees and middlemen. This recipe is ideal for rebellion among the villagers, and those whose patience runs thin often take to violence. This is where the Maoist ideologues step in and organize the disgruntled villagers into armed groups, training them in the use of guns and other weapons. Over the years, such armed groups, you can call them Maoist or disgruntled tribals and villagers, have taken control of vast swaths of land and territory in the hardest hit states. So much so that the writ of the government of India does not run in those areas. Since the apparent demand of the Maoists or the villagers under their influence is a stake in the government's development and other welfare activities, their movement finds many takers among the intelligentsia as well. In fact, the largest section of sympathizers of the Maoists and their movement comes from writers, literateurs, journalists, teachers, fine arts performers from theatre, films and music, etc., and social workers. In the event of a Maoist violent incident leading to, say, the murder of scores of policemen or villagers, this sympathy shows itself in the form of condemnation for the police action but not for the Maoist attack. Rather than having a proactive strategy for dealing with the situation by combining a concerted response to the Maoists with some quick result development activities, the central government has done little but form committees galore. 5 committees, coordination group, an interministerial group, a special task force, and now a unified command are already in existence, yet Maoist violence continues unabated. As far as the media perspective to this issue is concerned, the situation in the affected areas and the states is quite difficult. If a journalist or an editor expresses support for the villagers' cause, he runs the risk of being branded as a Maoist sympathizer by the establishment and then faces trouble. On the other hand, a vocal critic of the Maoists always faces the danger of being kidnapped or killed by the rebels for being an agent of the police or an informer for the police. The conflict is quite obvious between putting across the interests of the poor people who may or may not be Maoists and condemning the killing of patrolling policemen whose vehicles are ambushed and blown up by landmines or guerrilla style attacks. It is true that the very concept of the Indian state as it exists today is anathema to Maoists. It is also correct that a large section of villagers and tribals is still deprived of the government's benefits and social welfare schemes. But then, how correct it is or it would be to challenge the might and existence of the Indian state, and that too with support from the foreign soil? While at the personal level, one may find favor with the Maoist ideology, but as a professional media person, supporting an insurgent movement may not be a good idea at all. Journalists are entitled to have their own opinion about ways and means to combat growing Maoist menace, but all agree that a combination of good governance, proactive social development schemes, and winning back the confidence of the disgruntled villagers and tribals could dilute the influence of the Maoist leadership. While the problem shows no signs of abating, the most frequently asked question is whether a more aggressive response by the security forces is required or not. Internationally, concern is being voiced on the increasing number of casualties among the villagers and especially in the Central Reserve Police Force or the CRPF men in the Maoist hit areas. It is seen that the foreign media, especially from the Western countries, take a very jaded view of the problem and tend to blame the Indian establishment and its manner of handling the problem. They avoid criticizing the Maoist leaders for waging a war against the Indian state and organizing the killing of policemen, villagers and government employees. Obviously, they would like to believe that something must be wrong in the way that the Indian government runs its schemes and the way governance is handled. It is all the more reason for media persons in India to be cautious while writing or reporting such incidents. The basic tenets of objectivity, upholding of facts, keeping public interest in mind, and rising above personal political views need to be remembered all the time. In times to come, when a more combined and unified strategy is evolved at the central and states levels to fight the Maoist problem, there would be more occasions when the media persons would be expected to view and write about things in a very objective manner rather than taking sides. If a combination of tackling violence and encouraging development is required from one side, then from the media side, a combination of sympathy for the poor people and sympathy for the troubled police force is also required. Let us move on to the next political issue, which is named political crisis. Being a multi-party democracy, having a multitude of political parties has been a part of life in Indian society. Since winning an election is the only way to gain political power in the Indian system, political parties resort to all means to woo the voters, appease them, and then acquire their support to win the election. Since all parties resort to this, a certain element of political rivalry leading to a political crisis at one time or the other is inevitable. At the same time, intra-party rivalry between two functionaries of the same party, whether ruling party or the opposition party, is also common in all the parties. However, in recent years, political rivalry has grown so deep and bitter that meeting grounds between two parties, any two parties, appears very remote. It is very interesting to note that almost all political writing in the media owes its origin to political rivalry. Useful or spiteful information about a party or an individual is routinely leaked or passed on to the rivals or the media. The media may or may not make use of the information as such, but it definitely provides a clue to what may turn out to be a big political story. Aspiring political writers and reporters use such information exchange as a matter of daily routine. In India, as probably everywhere else, a rivalry between political parties is mostly because of one or more of the following reasons. The reasons would be common vote bank, common areas or constituency of influence, use of money, common patron or the common leadership, personal jealousy and clash of ambitions. While these reasons are just a few that can be grouped under broad categories, political rivalry can actually be triggered off by even the smallest and the most insignificant act of one-upmanship. There are many examples when rivalries grew over such small and inane issues such as getting photographed with the top leader or sharing space on the stage with the political patron. For the media, however, it is important to know the actual reason before believing or disbelieving the information made available to it. Occurrence of a political crisis due to conflict over any issue means that the media must run its own diagnosis and find out the acceptable path of treatment of that problem. If the media fails in its professional and ethical duties and responsibilities in generating a positive public opinion in this respect, then it is inevitable that the political crisis will deepen. In this context, it is always better, obviously, to understand in brief what the political crisis is. So, that is the first step while dealing with a political crisis, to know what actually the crisis is. Here, the information available for people to understand the crisis and the management of the same points towards the crucial role of the news media. This information has to be provided from some source which is credible, and the media is always considered to be a credible source. During a political crisis, the public depends almost totally on the media for news and for vital messages from the public and private authorities. If the event constitutes or is perceived as a major crisis, then there is a continuous demand for almost any information related to the event. The media both responds to and fuels these demands by interrupting their regular programming, rushing to the scene and reporting as extensively as possible, with the result that almost everything that is or can be covered in relation to the crisis becomes newsworthy. However, there are examples when the media as a whole discharged its duties during the political crisis in its own fashion, but failed to maintain a sense of objectivity. It led the people to speculate over the functioning of the media, since it provided the ground to divide public opinion rather than helping to formulate the agenda to create a healthy democratic fabric in the country. This in itself can lead to a crisis in democracy, and the people get dissatisfied with most leaders and most sectors of law, public and private beings, and more especially over the role of the media itself and its functioning. Theoretically speaking, a crisis in democracy does not necessarily have to bring about a crisis of democracy. Varying levels of performance of politicians and decision makers, personal ambition and jealousy, etc., allow the possibility of a crisis in democracy. A political crisis leads to the establishment feeling insecure, a rise in political opposition, exchange of claims and counterclaims, and during this time, the media serves or should serve primarily as a source of information about the impending crisis in an early stage, rather than giving guidance and consolation during and after the crisis. The media is expected to warn of the impending dangers and also inform as to how the crisis can be averted. It must also ensure a flow of accurate information without any political bias, guidance for future preparedness, educate the public in the right direction for safeguarding national interest. The media coverage of events should focus on making sense of the situation and suggest ways for long-term measures and perspective. The media must also check and counter-check for bias, and while reporting, it should be ensured that no political mileage is taken at the cost of the nation and public interest. Generally, the audience tends to trust the media, and therefore the media must ensure that this trust is upheld. That brings us to the issue of prejudice or bias in the media. The media is not immune to prejudices of one kind or the other, and it is often used in order to cultivate and nourish, sustain and spread certain prejudices. The media, incidentally, can easily become a handmaid also. Besides helping to perpetuate stereotypes and prejudices, the media can on itself set agendas, criteria and social norms, and also become guilty of branding certain areas as trouble torn, conflict zones, etc. Utmost caution and objectivity are required on the part of the media persons, who must weigh conflicting ideologies and claims in the context of a political crisis and rivalry, since on such occasions the society at large looks to the media for direction and clarity. The people expect the media to be a sane voice, to inform accurately and truthfully, to clarify and interpret and to show the way. However, the media coverage of some of the recent socio-political developments have raised worrying questions over the objectivity and responsibility of the media. The media must tell what is going on as completely, accurately, honestly and dispassionately as possible. It must be remembered that news is a competitive business, and today, with several channels airing round-the-clock news headlines and news discussions, the press has a tough task on hand to be first and fast with the news. Competition invariably leads to some abuses also, such as history reporting, exaggeration, sensationalism and quick judgments. The hallmark of any media is objectivity, but objectivity also needs to be constantly tested and proved. Most journalists prefer the criteria of balance, in which they give the versions of all the sides, meaning if there is a political story, if there is a news, then in addition to giving one side of the news, the version of the opposite party or the conflicting party must also be given to maintain a sense of balance. Some classic cases of political crisis where the media had either a role to play in conflict resolution or it cut a sorry figure include the conflicts in Punjab, Assam, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh and recently in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, etc. For example, during the years of Sikh militancy in the 80s in Punjab over the demand of creation of a so-called Khalistan state, all incidents of crime all over Punjab were seen as being connected to the militant movement, which obviously was not true. Similarly, there was a tendency to view the members of one entire community with suspicion. Thankfully, this did not last long, as the movement caused the maximum damage to the community and to Punjab. It was very serious and very ridiculous to see that during those years, every small incident of crime, whether it was a loot or a murder or whatever, was perceived to be an incident related to militancy, which was not always true. But in the media, such reports came out giving an impression that the entire state of Punjab was ridden with violence caused by the militants alone. This created a very negative picture of the crisis, and it did create some pockets of trouble in some places at one time or the other. Similarly, more recently, political rivalry in West Bengal between the left parties and the Trinamool Congress on one hand, and between the Congress and the left parties on the other, has caused many a publication in Kolkata and elsewhere come out with conflicting versions, especially during the violence in Nandigram in 2007. In fact, at that time, a lot of journalists, writers and other artists had come out in support of one party or the other on the streets of Kolkata and other places, and they also included some journalists. By doing so, those journalists and writers had made public which side they belonged to or which side they preferred to advocate, to represent. This was not a very good thing to do, because it put the media as one of the affected parties rather than an independent observer. More recently, in Uttar Pradesh, in the last few years, the rivalry between almost all the major political parties has often resulted in media reports being less than objective, and the combination of factors prevailing in Uttar Pradesh often makes matters complicated when the media reports or the news appearing in sections of media is seen as being one-sided or being not very objective. Then the political crisis in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh or Bihar also had very similar ingredients, such as partners in a ruling coalition criticizing each other, a chief minister facing a challenge to his authority from within his own party, and so on. All such situations gave journalists an opportunity to add more to their existing knowledge as to why and how such crises are caused. One may also recall that prolonged political crisis is seen in the aftermath of an election, whatever the result, or during the formation of a government, when claims and counterclaims are extended, when the search for potential allies begins, or when the ministry formation starts, then different political partners staking their claim to become a minister or the chief minister. And during this time, the media is full of speculative stories as to who might support whom, who might withdraw support to whom, who might become a minister and why, and so on. So, this is one area where the media often plays a role to either add to speculation or to give a credible picture. In any case, in a politically surcharged environment, for a reporter or editor to be objective and come out with a report that is acceptable to all sides is very important, and it is crucial that for doing so, the right perspective is maintained while making a political comment. With this, we come to an end of the discussion of the political scenario in the media perspective. We saw issues related to violence, Naxalism and political crisis, which were caused by a political reason at their root. Now, we move on to social problems that mark the scenario today. It is said that a society that strives to improve must be aware of its social problems. If journalism is a factor towards an improved and more transparent society, then journalists also must understand what kinds of problems the society faces today. Social problems appear relatively easier to understand when compared to physical or biological problems. The nature of social problems in India is not very different from those in other developed or developing countries of the world, although there are certain problems that are peculiar to this country because of its size, the differences in culture, social setup, and certain other historical and political reasons. Whatever the nature of social problems, for the media, These always make news and the topic of discussion and analysis. Reporters and editors have to come face to face with social problems very early on in their careers. Stories from cities and villages, sometimes simple, sometimes complicated, but always stemming out from an incident that had deep roots in a social problem, need to be written and commented upon. And if there is a lack of understanding of the problem, then the consequences could be serious, even to the extent of causing inconvenience or tension to a group of people or in a region. In this discussion that follows, we shall take a look at those social problems which lead to difficult situations, conflict, and invariably make news. Whereas there are and could be various other social problems which are serious, related to individuals, family, health, juvenile delinquency, addiction, gambling, prostitution, beggary, etc., that need the attention of social scientists. From the media perspective, we shall take up only those problems with a more macro impact on society, not having a localized impact, but having an impact on a large group of people and affecting public peace at large. First of all, let us talk about disputes related to territory or territorial controversies within among the states that continue to plague parts of Indian states even 64 years after independence. Territorial movements. When the nation gained independence in 1947, the geographical region called India was a confederation of states, provinces, and mini kingdoms ruled by a variety of kings, noblemen, maharajas, nawabs, and rajas, and the like. It was a difficult task for the nascent government of India, led by the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, to unite these territories into one union of India. The task was handled creditably and aggressively by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Home Minister at that time, also known as the Iron Man of India, for his strong will and commitment towards the future of the Indian Republic. However, despite the state's reorganization exercise, certain areas and natural resources remained caught in controversy because of conflicting claims, and the reorganization incidentally has happened several times since independence, but the conflicts remained. While the new states have been formed several times since independence, the conflict still continues to remain in some areas, frequently leading to violent demonstrations and a revival of claims and counterclaims at times. A brief discussion of the issues is being given here for the purpose of sensitization and basic information only. Some of the disputes are as this. Number 1, Telangana in Andhra Pradesh, Saurashtra in Gujarat, Belgaum in Karnataka, Darjeeling in West Bengal, the northeastern states, and the river disputes. First of all, we take up the issue of Telangana. For approximately 400 years, Telangana was a part of Hyderabad state, an independent kingdom ruled by the Muslim Qutub Shahi and Nizam dynasties. Andhra and Rayalaseema were separated from the Madras state in 1953. This Andhra state was the first state formed purely on linguistic nationality, that means the people of this region spoke one language, that was Telugu. Later, the Andhra state merged with Telangana in 1956, based again on their linguistic and national affinity, to form the present day state of Andhra Pradesh, with Hyderabad as the capital city. Two major agitations have taken place for a separate Telangana state since then, namely the Jai Telangana agitation in 1969 and the Jai Andhra agitation in 1972. Incidentally, Telangana remains one of the most backward regions in India and the most backward province in Andhra Pradesh state. An assurance to Telangana activists for a separate state was given as late as some years ago by the government of India, but not fulfilled, leading to a fresh agitation in early 2010.
100% dealing with Telangana agitation is not riding a horse, it is riding a tiger. 100% dealing with Telangana agitation is not riding a horse, it is riding a tiger.
After a long time, the Telangana Rashtriya Samiti chief is angry. It's about YSR's son Jagan Mohan Reddy's proposed Odarpur Yatra in Telangana. KCR says Jagan isn't welcome in the region because he didn't support a separate state.
I am clearly warning this state government to not to permit this yatra and not to make Warangal, not to create a war-like situation in the Warangal district, which is very peaceful now. Unnecessary, undesirable provocation, and ultimately, if they want to provoke Telangana, the same December kind of situation will repeat. It is up to the government. If they want to burn their fingers, let them burn. What for you are going to conduct this yatra? What is the meaning of it? Walking on our dead bodies, how can you come here?
Jagan Reddy says he wants to console the families of the people who died of shock when his father died. KCR is asking why he doesn't talk about the supporters of Telangana as well.
He is going to distribute only 64 lakhs according to his program, to 64 members 1 lakh each. Regarding this yatra, I think he is spending 10 crores of rupees to carry his private army along with him.
And then comes this remark.
100% dealing with Telangana agitation is not riding a horse, it is riding a tiger.
But what about KCR himself, who will be addressing rallies in Vijayawada? That's been at the forefront of the United Andhra agitation.
See, my visit to Vijayawada is totally different, you know. Some people who are in favor of a separate Andhra state are inviting me.
With Rajesh Vishwanathan in Hyderabad, Prasad Sanyal, News X.
The demand continues to be alive and the issue continues to be unsettled. Saurashtra. After India's independence in 1947, nearly 217 princely states of the Kathiawar and Saurashtra area on the west coast, including the former kingdom of Junagadh, were grouped together to form the state of Saurashtra in 1948. On November 1, 1956, this Saurashtra state was merged into Bombay state of that time. A few years later, in 1960, the former Bombay state was divided along linguistic lines into two new states of Gujarat and Maharashtra. The territory of Saurashtra, including that of Sorat or Junagadh, went to Gujarat and continues to be a part of the state of Gujarat. Saurashtra is a bunch of 7 cities and has a large sea coast on the western side of India. With the central government being ready to consider proposals for separate states, including Saurashtra in Gujarat, activists for a separate Saurashtra state are seeing renewed hopes of fulfilling their dreams. The movement for Saurashtra state has been continuing since the year 2001. Belgaum. The Belgaum border dispute is a dispute involving the states of Maharashtra and Karnataka. Belgaum, currently a part of Karnataka and earlier the former Bombay Presidency, is claimed by Maharashtra on linguistic grounds. After India became independent in 1947, the Belgaum district, which was in the former Bombay Presidency, became a part of the Bombay state, and in 1948 The Belgaum municipality requested the Indian Dominion, the Indian Constituent Assembly, and the Boundary Commission of that time to include the Belgaum municipal district in the proposed united or Sanyukta Maharashtra state. But in 1956, the Belgaum district was incorporated into the newly formed Mysore state, which is now Karnataka, with the passage of the States Reorganization Act. The act reorganized India's states along linguistic and administrative lines, despite having a large Marathi speaking population, about 3/4 of the total population of Belgaum. A recent confrontation on the issue led to violence in the Belgaum area, and the state governments of Maharashtra and Karnataka were at loggerheads over the issue. Both the state governments have now approached the central government to settle the issue, where it continues to be. The next controversy is over Darjeeling. The Gorkhas of Darjeeling district in the north of West Bengal want a separate state carved out from that area to be administered by the Gorkhas themselves. Gorkhaland is the name given to the area around Darjeeling and the Duars in northern part of West Bengal for the Nepali or Gorkhali speaking Gorkha ethnic group amidst a majority of Bengali speaking ethnic group. Although political parties had been working in the region since the 1940s for greater identity for the Gorkha ethnic group and demanded economic freedom for the community, the ongoing agitation for a separate state for the Nepali speaking population was started by the Gorkha National Liberation Front or GNLF by Subhash Ghesing in the 1980s, resulting in the establishment of an elected body in 1988 called the Darjeeling Gorkha Hill Council, which received autonomy to govern the Darjeeling district. However, in 2008, a new party, more militant, named the Gorkha Janmukti Morcha, raised the demand of separate statehood once again, which was categorically denied by both the government of West Bengal and the central government. Both of them chose to adhere to the previous arrangement of a hill council. The stalemate continues after recent violent incidents over the issue. The northeastern states. In the northeastern region, border disputes have been raging for decades, involving Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Manipur and Nagaland. The dispute between Assam and Nagaland is currently the most prominent, with a history of violent clashes between border communities. Both states have accused each other of illegally occupying each other's territories. With the demand for unification of all Naga inhabited areas in the background, the dispute has acquired an enlarged dimension. Many conflicts in the region concern state borders, such as between the Karbis and the Khasis on Assam-Meghalaya border, and between the residents of Jasami village in Ukhrul district of Manipur and a village in Phek district of Nagaland. Recently, the blockade of the national highway, which carries important supplies to Manipur in the Nagaland area, caused great tension in the region, and a bandh lasted for several days. The dispute between Nagaland and Manipur is continuing for a long time, for decades in fact, and still does not appear to be solved. Then we come to the issue of river disputes. The central government, incidentally, has set up tribunals for settling the many interstate water disputes under an umbrella act known as the Interstate River Water Disputes Act 1956. The major disputes and the states involved are as follows. The Krishna River, involving the states of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. Godavari, involving Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha. Narmada, involving Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat and Maharashtra. Kaveri, involving Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and the Union Territory of Pondicherry. Krishna, involving Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra. Mandovi, involving Goa and Karnataka, and Vansadhara, involving Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. With this, we conclude the part dealing with internal territorial movements. It is important to remember that whenever something is written about these issues, extreme caution needs to be exercised so that the sensitivities of the people and the parties concerned is not hurt, and also that it is not for the media to settle these controversies by taking a stand for or against any of the demands. A brief mention must also be made of conflicts regarding territory between India and the neighboring states, especially with China and Pakistan and to some extent with Bangladesh. Such conflicts are mainly concerned with international law and a certain arrangement between the two countries concerned, that is between either India and Pakistan or India and China or India and Bangladesh, has been in place to keep the issue in check and not lead to further conflagration. Since such issues involved a broader national perspective, so here the media happens to write whatever the Indian position is, and the Indian position is made available to the media by our Government of India or the Ministry of External Affairs and so on. So in that case, the media's approach is fairly clear and certain. Let us now move on to linguistic and education related controversies. Since independence, many states have been formed on the basis of linguistic majority population, and the central government has been committed to promote Hindi as the official national language and English as the link language for official purposes. All states also have the discretion to use the dominant language of that region for official purposes within the state, such as Gujarati within Gujarat or Marathi within Maharashtra and so on. Accordingly, while every state has been using a regional language, it also uses Hindi and English for official purposes and for the purposes of public transactions in marketplaces and public places and so on. However, there have been a few states where movements for a more aggressive and widespread use of the regional language have often turned violent. Foremost among them is Maharashtra, where local and regional political parties have launched a movement towards compulsory use of Marathi language in Mumbai in public places and in educational, commercial and government organizations. The movement initially aimed against non-Maharashtrians, especially North Indians from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, who flocked to Mumbai in large numbers. These immigrants generally do not use Marathi in that quantum initially as the locals, and if they continue to live there for some time, they pick up a fairly good Marathi language. But the agitation against them initially started on the basis of spoken language only. There have been instances where the largely Hindi speaking media based in New Delhi has gone overboard in reporting these incidents in Maharashtra, particularly in Mumbai, whereas the actual situation was not that bad. The subsequent creation of panic in the rest of India, especially in North India, was quite uncalled for. It has happened on many occasions that some isolated incidents of Hindi speaking people being beaten up or use of Hindi being, violent demonstrations taking place against use of Hindi were shown to be like prevailing in the entire state, whereas the true picture was not that. Some decades ago, a movement against the use of Hindi in public places, signboards, etc. had been launched in Tamil Nadu state also. The movement aimed more at consolidating the political hold of the regional parties than anything else. The movement, incidentally, had not seen any recurrence since then, as the regional parties took a firm control of the state's politics. In other states, many other states where Hindi is not the first dominant language, the agitation against the use of Hindi has not been very violent or very widespread, although many states of this kind with their own regional languages have been making efforts to promote their own regional language, such as Odia or Chhattisgarhi and so on, but the movement against Hindi has not been widespread to be counted as a controversy. Let us move on to movements over educational purposes or over syllabus in particular. In recent years, especially since non-Congress parties came to power at the center, there have been attempts to revise the syllabus of some textbooks, mainly history at the school level. The contention is that history books contain some chapters and some components that show some communities or castes in a bad light. While some call it an exercise to correct historical wrongs committed by the British, others allege it is more a case of saffronization of history books. The issue is a sensitive one, and the media has mostly taken a partisan stand instead of going into the details of the arguments of both sides. Obviously, this stand of the media is more a result of extreme caution required to keep things from becoming explosive. The issue of having a national common curriculum in history, science and some other subjects is still being debated at the central and state level, and in years to come we will hear more about it. Similar is the case with the government's attempts to come up with a uniform syllabus for engineering, commerce and other subjects. Some states oppose it, citing the region's unique requirements. Instead of examining the arguments closely, the media often plays along the regional sentiment. As you must have noticed, the social aspects discussed so far constitute the controversies that have been making the headlines in recent times. The objective so far in this discussion has been to apprise those who wish to make an entry into the world of media to get acquainted with the basics of political, social and economic realities of life in India today. With this, we come to an end of this part of the discussion on socio-economic and political scenario and the media perspective. To recap, we saw that the Maoist insurgency is a combination of social and a law and order problem with external forces trying to fish in troubled waters. It has spread to a large number of states and needs a concerted strategy to be tackled. The media needs to understand the complete picture before taking sides. Political rivalry and political crisis are a part of Indian society in view of the plurality of political parties and electoral victory being the highest prize in the democratic setup. Political crisis could be caused by significant or most insignificant reasons, yet The impact means a story for the media. Therefore, the need for caution is great. Among social issues, movements and disputes involving territories between different states, language, educational and cultural issues have been causing tension and violence in different parts of the country. The media needs to sensitize itself towards these controversies in order to maintain peace and order in the larger part of society. In our next discussion, we shall discuss the remaining aspects of the social and economic scenario with the media's perspective. Till then, my best wishes. Thank you.